Okay, get ready to play veterinary detective, because today we're diving deep into animal abortions and neonatal loss.
Oh, it's a fascinating area.
We're talking Kirkbride's diagnosis of abortion and neonatal loss in animals. This book, it's like the Bible for this stuff.
Yeah, it's the go-to resource.
So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to understand how vets use this to crack the case when an animal loses a pregnancy.
Absolutely. It's a real detective story.
Mm-hmm.
And just like any good detective story, it all starts with the history.
Okay, so let's talk history. The book really seems to hammer home the importance of getting a detailed history. What kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, imagine you're piecing together a puzzle, right? Each little detail the farmer can give us adds to the big picture. Like, was the feed homegrown or was it from a supplier?
Right.
Because that could point to a potential toxin,
Right.
Or maybe a nutritional deficiency. And get this, even the quality of last year's harvest matters.
Wait, really? Last year's hay is important?
Oh yeah, because a bad batch, that could be hiding mycotoxins.
Uh-oh.
Those are nasty fungal byproducts that can really mess with pregnancies. So we're already building our suspect list just by asking about the feed.
It's like in those old detective movies, what were you doing on the night of? But in this case, it's what were your animals eating like months ago?
Exactly. And don't even get me started on herd dynamics. Was there a new animal brought in recently? Because newcomers, they can bring diseases that spread like wildfire. It's like contact tracing, trying to find patient zero in an outbreak.
So the history, it's like our evidence board with all these seemingly random details that could end up being the key to cracking the case wide open. It's all connected.
But once we've got our leads, we need to collect some hard evidence. I've heard whispers about this thing called a specimen package.
Ah, yes, the specimen package.
It sounds a little creepy, not gonna lie.
It's not as ominous as it sounds.
Like something out of a horror movie.
More like a care package for the lab.
Okay.
We're talking about getting the right samples and making sure they get to those who can analyze them properly. Usually fresh tissue samples, lung, liver, kidney.
Why those organs in particular?
They're like information hubs.
Okay.
They tend to show signs if there's a systemic disease going on, which can give us clues about what went wrong with the pregnancy. And here's a fun fact for you. The containers have to be sterile and no syringes allowed.
Wait, what? No syringes. Why not? That seems strangely ominous. Well, syringes can introduce air bubbles, which can mess with the sterility of the sample, and that can throw off the test results.
That makes sense.
Plus, imagine a leaky syringe in transit.
Okay, yeah, no leaky syringe packages.
Not ideal.
So the lab has their carefully packaged clues. It's time to figure out what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Are we talking about a one-off situation or something more alarming? I'm talking about those dreaded abortion storms.
Yeah. A single abortion is one thing, but a storm, that's every farmer's worst nightmare. And here's where Kirkbride's drops a truth bomb. Even 3 abortions, that can be considered a storm.
3.
Regardless of the size of the herd.
Wow, I would thought you'd need way more than 3 to be considered a storm. Why is that number so significant?
Because it usually means there's an infectious cause that's spreading through the herd, and we need to figure out what it is so we can stop it.
Okay, so the pressure is on. We've got our history, we've got our specimen package, we might even have an outbreak on our hands. Time to roll up our sleeves and examine the evidence.
Absolutely, and sometimes that means doing a mini autopsy.
On a fetus?
On a fetus.
Okay, fetal forensics. What can we possibly learn from that?
A surprising amount, actually. For example, we can figure out how long ago the fetus died by looking at the degree of autolysis.
Auto what now?
Autolysis. It's basically the process of decomposition. The more decomposed the fetus is, the longer it's been since it died. Helps us build a timeline.
It's like a biological clock. That's fascinating.
Exactly. Another thing we look for is meconium staining.
Meconium, like the baby's first poop.
Exactly. Finding meconium on a fetus, it usually means it was under stress and it expelled that before death.
So we're talking some serious detective work here, analyzing poop, analyzing decomposition.
It gets even wilder. We can tell if a stillborn was ever alive by examining its lungs.
Wait, really? How can you tell that?
If the lungs have ever inflated with air, there are signs. It's incredible.
That's mind-blowing. And I'm guessing we can't forget about the placenta. That's got to be more than just a sac, right?
You're right. The type of placenta can actually tell us a lot about how diseases might be transmitted.
Okay.
And get this, any lesions or abnormalities on the placenta, those can be like fingerprints at a crime scene, pointing us towards the cause of the abortion.
Okay, this is officially way cooler than I ever thought a placenta could be. So we've got our history, we've got our specimens, we're analyzing fetal remains and placentas like seasoned detectives. What's next in our veterinary investigation?
Time to narrow down the suspects. And since we're dealing with a cattle ranch in this case, let's start with the usual bovine suspects.
All right, let's round them up. What are the most common culprits behind cattle abortions? All right, let's round them up. What are the most common culprits behind cattle abortions?
Well, one of the usual suspects is BVDV.
BVD.
Bovine viral diarrhea virus.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky one because it can cause a whole range of problems.
Okay.
You might see calves with birth defects, stillbirths, or even just a few weak calves in the herd.
So it's kind of like a viral chameleon. How do you even begin to track down something that sneaky?
That's where those tissue samples from our specimen package come in.
Oh, okay.
Lab analysis can help us figure out if the virus is present, and it helps us rule out other potential causes.
So BVDV is at the top of our suspect list. Who else are we looking at?
Leptospirosis is another big one. And this one's not just a problem for cattle.
Oh.
It can actually infect humans too.
Whoa, okay. A zoonotic threat. This case just got personal. What are the risks to humans and how do we prevent it from spreading?
Well, in humans, it can cause flu-like symptoms, and in some cases, it can lead to liver or even kidney damage.
Ooh, wow.
The good news is vaccination and good hygiene practices, those can protect both humans and animals. It's a good reminder that farmers and vets really need to work together to, solve these mysteries.
Absolutely. We've got to protect ourselves while we're out here solving these cases. So we've got a virus and a bacteria on our list of suspects. What other microbial mischief makers should we be aware of?
Don't forget about parasites. Neospora caninum, that can cause abortions in cattle. And often, there aren't any obvious symptoms in the mother.
So it's a silent threat. How do we even know to look for something like that?
Blood tests are a key diagnostic tool for Neospora. And luckily, there are management practices that farmers can use to lower the risk of infection.
It's like we need a two-pronged approach. We have to solve the case, but we also have to prevent future outbreaks. We've talked a lot about cattle, but what about sheep and goats? I've heard they'll eat just about anything.
They do.
Could that play a role in their reproductive health?
Absolutely. Diet plays a huge role. Remember those mycotoxins we talked about earlier?
Right, the ones hiding in the feed.
Those are a concern for sheep and goats, too.
So beyond that, what are some of the most common causes of abortion in sheep and goats?
Well, Campylobacter is a frequent offender, and it often leaves behind these very characteristic lesions on the liver. We can actually see them during a necropsy.
So it's like their bodies are trying to tell us what happened even after they're gone.
Exactly. Then there's Toxoplasma gondii, another zoonotic parasite, and it can infect a whole range of animals, including us.
Okay. Yet another reminder to wash our hands.
Always a good idea.
Any other dietary dangers lurking out there for sheep and goats?
We can't forget about toxic plants. Some plants, like lupine, are actually teratogenic.
Teratogenic.
It means they can cause birth defects in developing offspring.
So it's not just about what the mother eats, it's about how it could impact the fetus. It's like a whole other layer of complexity.
It is, and it shows how important pasture management is. Farmers need to know what's growing in their fields.
That makes sense. So from fungal toxins in their food to poisonous plants, it seems like these animals are walking a dietary tightrope. Speaking of different dietary needs, what about pigs? I mean, they have totally different digestive systems. Does that change things when it comes to abortions?
Oh, absolutely. Pigs are interesting because with them, viral causes are much more common when it comes to abortions.
Really? So viral infections are public enemy number one for pig pregnancies?
You could see that? One of the major culprits is PRRSV.
PRRSV.
Porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome virus. It's a real nightmare for pig farmers because it can spread through a herd so quickly, and it can stick around for months.
That sounds like a biosecurity breach waiting to happen. How do farmers even begin to contain something that contagious?
It's all about being proactive. Strict biosecurity protocols, things like limiting visitors to the farm and disinfecting equipment, are really important for preventing the virus from taking hold. And vaccination is also really important.
So we're building a fortress of prevention.
Exactly. And while PRRSV is a big one, we can't forget about PCV2.
Another acronym.
Another virus. PCV2, or porcine circovirus type 2, is another one of those tiny viruses that can cause some big problems. It's often associated with mummified fetuses, which is obviously a very sad thing for a farmer to see.
Mummified fetuses? That sounds unsettling.
It is. And it shows just how devastating these viruses can be. But like with PRRSV, early detection, vaccination, and good biosecurity, those are our best defenses.
Knowledge is power. So we've covered cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. What about horses? They always seem so majestic and strong. Surely they're immune to these kinds of reproductive problems.
Not quite. Even those graceful equines have their weaknesses when it comes to pregnancy.
Oh no. So even those majestic creatures aren't safe from the heartbreak of pregnancy loss. What are some of the biggest threats to their reproductive health?
Well, equine herpes virus is a major one. It can cause late-term abortions, which are often what we call red bag deliveries.
Red bag deliveries. That sounds kind of ominous. What does that even mean?
It means that the placenta has separated from the uterine wall too early.
Oh no.
Which basically cuts off the foal's oxygen supply.
That sounds terrifying.
It's definitely an emergency.
Wow. What causes something like that to happen?
Often, it's equine herpes virus. And while there's no cure for the virus itself, vaccination can really help lower the risk of infection and those really sad late-term abortions.
Okay, another vote for prevention. Are there any other horse-specific suspects we should add to our list?
There's this condition called nocardioform placentitis. It's a mouthful.
It is.
Basically, it's an inflammation of the placenta, and it's caused by certain types of bacteria. It's a tough one to diagnose because you often don't see obvious symptoms until it's too late.
It's a silent threat. Sounds like early detection is key.
Absolutely. Regular vet checkups during pregnancy are so important.
Makes sense.
And any unusual discharge or signs of discomfort should be checked out right away.
It's like we're constantly on the lookout for clues, trying to piece things together. Now, we've talked about viral suspects, sneaky parasites, even toxic plants, but I'm curious.
What are you thinking?
We've been talking about domestic animals this whole time. What about their wild counterparts? Do they face similar reproductive challenges?
That's a great question. And it takes us into a whole other world of veterinary detective work. Because even though the suspects might be similar, investigating those cases in the wild, that's a whole different story.
I bet. It's not like you can round up a herd of wild horses for a checkup. How on earth do they diagnose these issues in wild animals?
It takes ingenuity, a lot of observation, and what we call non-invasive techniques.
Non-invasive techniques. What does that mean? How do you get evidence from an animal that would rather you just stay away?
Well, think about those specimen packages we talked about. In the wild, we often have to rely on what nature leaves behind.
Okay.
Fecal samples, for example.
Poop.
Poop can actually tell us a lot about an animal.
It's like CSI, Animal Edition. Instead of dusting for fingerprints, we're analyzing poop.
Exactly. And it might not be as glamorous, but those fecal samples can be really important for solving some big mysteries.
So from analyzing poop to tracking down these elusive pathogens, it sounds like wildlife vets need to be masters of adaptation.
They do. And with climate change throwing another wrench in the works, their job is more important now than ever.
Climate change. How does that play into all of this?
Well, as temperatures change and weather patterns become less predictable, it impacts everything.
Wow.
Animal migration, the spread of diseases. It's like the game board just got a whole lot bigger.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've traded in my magnifying glass for a microscope. And maybe a hazmat suit.
And we've only scratched the surface. There's still so much to learn about this field.
There always is. Speaking of which, I'm dying to hear more about how they investigate these cases in the wild. Any particularly interesting examples?
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about those tuxedo-clad creatures of the Southern Ocean, penguins.
Penguins. Okay, now that's a plot twist. What kind of reproductive mysteries are we unraveling in the penguin world?
Well, believe it or not, even in a place like Antarctica, which seems so pristine, penguins face a whole host of reproductive challenges.
Really?
Yeah.
I always picture Antarctica as this untouched wilderness. What kind of threats are we talking about?
It's easy to forget that penguins are susceptible to infectious diseases, just like any other creature. Avian influenza, for example, can spread through penguin colonies like wildfire.
Wow, so even in the most remote parts of the planet, those microscopic villains can still cause trouble. How do they even begin to study something like that in such a challenging environment?
It takes a lot of dedication, that's for sure, and a healthy dose of creativity. Imagine trying to collect samples from a colony of penguins without disturbing them or stressing them out.
Okay, I'm already picturing myself slipping on the ice trying to wrangle a penguin. Not a graceful look.
It's definitely not for the faint of heart. Wildlife veterinarians often have to use some pretty ingenious techniques to collect samples without causing any unnecessary stress.
Like what? Give me an example. I need to know how they pull this off.
One technique they use is a specially designed penguin sock. It's basically a soft bag that they can gently restrain the bird in while they collect a blood sample or do a quick exam.
A penguin sock. Okay, that's amazing. I never would have imagined such a thing existed.
It's just one example of the many creative ways researchers are trying to understand and protect these incredible creatures.
So it's high-tech analysis and good old-fashioned ingenuity.
You got it. And every little bit of information we get brings us one step closer to ensuring these penguins have a healthy future.
Well, this deep dive has definitely taken us to some unexpected places. From examining placentas to talking penguin socks, it's been quite the ride.
And we're not done yet. There's still so many mysteries to uncover in the world of animal reproduction.
Okay, you've officially got me hooked on this whole veterinary detective thing. What other enigmatic cases are we diving into next?
Okay, you've officially got me hooked on this whole veterinary detective thing. What other enigmatic cases are we diving into next?
Well, we were talking about penguins and those reproductive challenges they face, even in Antarctica.
Right, it's easy to think of those icy landscapes as like totally untouched. But I guess even penguins aren't immune to the struggles of parenthood. What kind of detective work goes into figuring out what's going wrong in those penguin nurseries?
Oh, it can be incredibly challenging. Just getting to the penguin colonies often requires, special permits, boats, all the cold weather gear. And that's before we even start thinking about how to collect samples.
I can only imagine. It's not like you can just set up a little doctor's office on the ice and ask the penguins to line up, right? You got it. Wildlife vets have to be so resourceful. They rely a lot on observation. Just watching the penguins.
Okay.
Looking for any signs of illness or changes in their behavior, or if any of the chicks aren't thriving.
So it's like piecing together a puzzle, but you've got limited pieces and a whole lot of ice to deal with.
Exactly. And then when they do need to examine a penguin up close, they have to be incredibly careful not to stress it out. Remember those penguin socks?
Oh, right, the penguin burritos. It's amazing how they've come up with these, creative and non-invasive ways to get the information they need.
It's pretty remarkable. And their efforts are paying off. We're learning more and more about the things that threaten penguins. Some of them might surprise you.
Okay, hit me with a penguin plot twist. What kind of unexpected threats are we talking about?
Well, you might be surprised to learn that penguins can be affected by a lot of the same pollutants that we deal with in other parts of the world.
Really?
Things like heavy metals, even pesticides.
Wow. I never would have thought about pesticides in Antarctica. But it makes sense.
It all builds up in the food chain, you see. And it can have pretty serious effects on their health, including their ability to reproduce.
It's a good reminder that we're all connected. What we do here can have an impact even in the most remote corners of the planet.
Absolutely. And that's why this research is so important.
So what can we do as, regular people who care about these things?
No.
How can we help solve these penguin mysteries?
Well, supporting organizations that are working to protect penguins, that's always a good step.
Okay.
And just being mindful of our own environmental footprint.
Right, because every little bit helps.
It really does.
This has been amazing. I've gone from being a little squeamish about those specimen packages to being totally fascinated by all of this.
It's pretty incredible work, isn't it?
It really is. Thank you so much for taking us on this journey with you.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, a little curiosity can go a long way.
It certainly can. And on that note, we'll be back next time with another deep dive into a new and fascinating topic. Until then, keep those brains buzzing.